Micro-private equity versus micro-private credit, the pros and cons. There comes a point in every financier's life when the words micro and private stop sounding like adjectives and start sounding like a lifestyle choice. You are no longer buying slices of FTSE giants or arguing about the relative virtues of megafunds over expensive coffee. Instead, you are rummaging around in the engine room of capitalism, peering into companies small enough to fit into a single industrial unit on a damp trading estate just off the A road. Welcome to the world of micro-private capital, where sums are modest, spreadsheets are personal, and the managing director still answers the phone himself, unless he's out fixing the van. Within this world, two tribes stand opposite each other across a slightly sticky pub table, micro-private equity on one side, and micro-private credit on the other. They share a postcode, a fondness for management accounts that arrive late, and a deep suspicion of forecasts. Yet philosophically, emotionally, and sometimes spiritually, they could not be more different. One wants to own the business and add value. The other wants to lend money, get paid, and sleep at night. Both claim moral superiority, and both are convinced the other side is missing something obvious. This essay sets out to explore micro-private equity versus micro-private credit, what they are, how they work, where they shine, where they disappoint, and why sensible people can end up on either side of the argument. It will do so in British English, with a little humor, and without sending you scurrying off to external websites like a nervous intern. By the end, you should at least know which camp you instinctively belong to, and possibly why you argue about it at dinner. Defining the micro in micro-private capital. Before diving into the equity versus credit bun fight, it is worth establishing what we mean by micro. This is not the land of billion-pound buyouts, battalions of advisors, or data rooms so large they require their own postcode. Micro-private capital deals are typically small, often involving enterprise values in the low single-digit millions, sometimes even hundreds of thousands. The businesses involved may have fewer than 20 employees, a managing director who also does payroll, and a product line that still relies on a supplier relationship formed in 1997 and never revisited. In this realm, information is imperfect, systems are idiosyncratic, and relationships matter far more than pitch decks. Deals are done through conversations, trust, and the occasional raised eyebrow. The distinction between equity and credit becomes particularly sharp here, because scale no longer smooths the edges. Every decision is felt keenly. Every pound matters. And every wrong assumption has the potential to ruin Christmas. What is micro-private equity? Micro-private equity involves taking an ownership stake, often a controlling one, in a small, privately held business. The investor does not merely lend money, they buy shares, acquire influence, and sometimes inherit a desk, a temperamental printer, and a set of keys to the office. The equity investor's return comes from growth in the value of the business over time, typically realized through a sale, recapitalization, or, if one is feeling particularly optimistic, dividends along the way. The classic micro-private equity thesis is simple in outline and complex in execution. Buy a decent business at a sensible price, help it improve, and sell it later for more than you paid. In practice, help it improve can mean anything from introducing basic financial discipline to replacing the founder's nephew as head of sales. It may involve professionalizing systems, tightening working capital, or simply persuading the managing director that cash flow is not an optional extra. Micro-private equity is hands-on, personal, and occasionally awkward, like being invited into someone else's family argument and expected to fix it. The allure of micro-private equity. The appeal of micro-private equity is easy to understand, particularly for those with a mildly entrepreneurial streak and a fondness for control. You are not just backing a business, you are shaping it. You get to sit at the table where decisions are made, and occasionally bang that table for emphasis. Upside potential. The most obvious attraction is upside. Equity offers theoretically unlimited returns. If the business does brilliantly, if revenues grow, margins improve, and the exit multiple behaves itself, the equity investor participates fully. In micro deals, where inefficiencies are rife and improvements can be dramatic, this upside can be genuinely transformative. Turning a modest regional operation into a scalable national business is not unheard of, and the rewards can be handsome. Influence and control. Advertisement. Privacy settings. Micro-private equity also offers influence. You can appoint directors, approve budgets, and steer strategy. For investors who believe strongly in their own judgment, and let us be honest, that includes most investors, this is deeply satisfying. There is a sense of agency that simply does not exist in credit. If things go wrong, you can at least console yourself with the knowledge that you tried to fix them. Value creation as a craft. There is also a craft element. Good micro-private equity investing feels less like financial engineering and more like business building. It rewards judgment, patience, and interpersonal skill. It suits those who enjoy rolling up their sleeves, asking awkward questions, and occasionally explaining very slowly why gross margin matters. When it works, it is immensely rewarding, not just financially, but intellectually and emotionally. The darker side of micro-private equity. For all its romance, micro-private equity is not a walk in the park. In fact, it is often a trudge through mud, punctuated by moments of genuine despair. Risk of permanent capital loss. Equity sits at the bottom of the capital structure. When things go wrong, equity is the first to suffer and often the first to be wiped out. In micro-businesses, where resilience is limited and shocks can be fatal, this risk is very real. A lost contract, a key employee leaving, or an unexpected tax bill can quickly turn an investment thesis into a cautionary tale. Illiquidity and time horizons. Micro-private equity is profoundly illiquid. There is no ready market for your shares, no convenient exit button. You are in for the long haul, whether you like it or not. Exits take time, effort, and a cooperative universe. This can be frustrating for investors who discover, too late, that patience is not actually their strongest virtue. Operational headaches. Ownership brings responsibility, and responsibility brings headaches. You may find yourself involved in disputes between founders, negotiating with suppliers, or dealing with staff issues that were never mentioned in the investment memo. The boundary between investor and operator can blur alarmingly. If you dislike confrontation or prefer your problems to be abstract, equity may not be for you. What is micro-private credit? Micro-private credit, by contrast, is about lending money to small businesses, typically outside the mainstream banking system. The investor provides debt, often secured, sometimes not, in return for interest and the repayment of principal over time. The focus is on downside protection, predictable cash flows, and getting your money back with a modest premium for your trouble. In micro settings, private credit often fills a gap left by cautious banks. Businesses may be too small, too unconventional, or too recently established to meet standard lending criteria. Micro-private credit steps in, offering flexible structures, bespoke terms, and a willingness to engage with reality rather than tick boxes. The appeal of micro-private credit. For many investors, micro-private credit feels like a warm cup of tea on a rainy afternoon. It may not be thrilling, but it is reassuring. Predictable returns. The primary attraction is predictability. Credit offers defined returns, interest payments, fees, and principal repayment. While defaults can and do happen, the expected return profile is narrower and more stable than equity. For investors who value cash flow and dislike surprises, this is a major selling point. Downside protection. Debt usually comes with some form of security, covenants, or contractual rights. In the event of trouble, the lender has recourse, assets to claim, guarantees to enforce, or at least a seat at the table when decisions are made. This does not eliminate risk, but it does mitigate it. In micro businesses, where asset values may be modest but tangible, this protection can be meaningful. Simplicity and distance. Micro-private credit also allows for a certain emotional distance. You are not trying to run the business, you are assessing its ability to service debt. Your involvement is focused on monitoring rather than managing. This suits investors who prefer analysis to intervention, and who enjoy the comfort of knowing exactly where they stand in the pecking order. The downsides of micro-private credit. Of course, micro-private credit is not without its drawbacks. Anyone who claims otherwise is either selling something or has never had to chase a late payment. Limited upside. The most obvious limitation is capped returns. No matter how well the business performs, the lender's upside is fixed. If the company becomes wildly successful, the credit investor watches politely from the sidelines, collecting the same interest as if nothing remarkable had happened. For some, this feels like leaving money on the table. Default risk and complexity. While credit is safer than equity in theory, in practice micro-private credit can be messy. Enforcement is time-consuming, recovery uncertain, and legal costs disproportionately high relative to deal size. A default can quickly turn a supposedly simple loan into a drawn-out saga involving solicitors, administrators, and uncomfortable meetings. Dependency on cash flow. Micro-private credit relies heavily on cash flow. If the business experiences volatility, seasonality, or one-off shocks, servicing debt can become a struggle. Unlike equity, which can theoretically wait, debt demands punctuality. This can put strain on both borrower and lender, particularly in fragile micro-enterprises. Comparing risk and reward. At the heart of the equity versus credit debate lies the eternal trade-off between risk and reward. Micro-private equity offers higher potential returns at the cost of higher risk and greater involvement. Micro-private credit offers lower, more predictable returns with greater emphasis on capital preservation. In micro-markets, this trade-off is amplified. The absence of scale, diversification, and institutional buffers means outcomes are more extreme. Equity wins can be spectacular, but losses can be total. Credit returns can be steady, but recoveries in default may be modest. The choice between the two often reflects temperament as much as analysis. Some investors thrive on uncertainty and enjoy the challenge of creating value. Others prefer the comfort of contractual rights and regular income. Neither approach is inherently superior, they simply suit different personalities. The human factor. One aspect often overlooked in theoretical discussions is the human factor. In micro-private capital, people matter enormously. Founders, managers, employees, and investors are all closer to the action, and relationships are harder to abstract away. Micro-private equity investors must navigate egos, emotions, and sometimes bruised pride. Taking an ownership stake can feel intrusive to founders, particularly those who build the business from nothing. Managing this dynamic requires tact, empathy, and the occasional stiff drink. Micro-private credit investors are not immune to human complications either. Borrowers may see lenders as both lifeline and threat. Negotiations around covenants, waivers, or restructurings can become fraught. The line between firmness and flexibility is delicate, and missteps can sour relationships quickly. Time, effort, and lifestyle considerations. It is also worth considering the lifestyle implications. Micro-private equity can be all-consuming. Portfolio companies do not respect weekends, and crises have a habit of emerging just as you sit down to dinner. The hands-on nature of equity investing demands time, energy, and emotional bandwidth. Micro-private credit is generally less demanding day-to-day, though not entirely passive. Monitoring, reporting, and occasional intervention are required, but the intensity is usually lower. For investors balancing multiple commitments, or simply valuing a quieter life, this can be a decisive factor. Blurred lines and hybrid approaches. In practice, the distinction between micro-private equity and micro-private credit is not always clear-cut. Many deals involve hybrid structures, convertible loans, preferred equity, or instruments that sit somewhere between debt and equity. These hybrids aim to capture some upside while retaining downside protection. Such structures can be elegant solutions in micro contexts, aligning incentives and sharing risk. They can also be fiendishly complex, leading to confusion and disagreement when circumstances change. As ever, simplicity has much to recommend it, particularly when dealing with small businesses and limited resources. Which is better? The question of which is better, micro-private equity or micro-private credit, has no universal answer. It depends on objectives, temperament, risk tolerance, and skill set. Equity suits those who enjoy involvement and influence, are comfortable with uncertainty, seek high returns and accept the risk of loss, have operational or strategic experience to add. Credit suits those who value predictability and income, prioritize capital preservation, prefer contractual clarity to control, are comfortable saying no when cash runs short. Many investors sensibly do both, balancing portfolios across the spectrum. In micro markets, diversification is hard to achieve within a single strategy, so combining equity and credit can provide a more resilient overall approach. A note on humility. If there is one lesson that unites micro-private equity and micro-private credit, it is the importance of humility. Small businesses are complex, fragile, and often surprising. Forecasts are optimistic, plans go awry, and reality has a habit of intervening at the worst possible moment. The best investors, whether equity or credit, approach micro deals with curiosity rather than arrogance. They listen, ask questions, and remain alert to changing circumstances. They understand that success owes as much to luck as to skill, and that failure is rarely as instructive as one hopes. Conclusion: two sides of the same coin. Micro-private equity and micro-private credit are not enemies so much as complementary expressions of the same impulse, to allocate capital thoughtfully to small businesses and be rewarded for the risk. One emphasizes ownership and upside, the other security and income. Both require judgment, discipline, and a tolerance for imperfection. In the end, the choice between them says as much about the investor as it does about the investment. Are you a builder or a banker? A fixer or a financier? Do you relish the messiness of ownership, or do you prefer the clean lines of a loan agreement? Whichever path you choose, the micro end of the market will keep you honest. It will test your assumptions, your patience, and occasionally your sanity. But it will also remind you why capital allocation matters, and why, in a small way, it can still feel personal. And if nothing else, it will give you excellent stories to tell, preferably over a pint, about the time you thought a spreadsheet told the whole truth and reality politely disagreed.